In the heart of Seoul, beneath the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, lies a quiet neighborhood that the city's constant hum has never quite reached. Here, among the narrow alleys and traditional Hanok houses, memories linger like a forgotten scent. It is in this unassuming area that the story of the crying begins, a tale of grief, guilt, and the insidious nature of regret. This is not a story of blood and terror, but of a haunting that grows deeper with every passing moment, one that seeps into the very bones of the living. The incident that sparked the horrors of this tale began not with a ghost, but with a sound so faint at first it could have been easily dismissed, just another part of the everyday noise of life. But as time passed, the sound grew clearer, and its source, though invisible, became undeniable. The protagonist of this haunting story, a young man named Ju Hyun, had always been a skeptic. Raised in a world dominated by reason, science, and the tangible, he had no patience for the superstitions that plagued his homeland. Ghosts, spirits, and supernatural forces were merely stories told by the elderly to frighten children, nothing more. Ju Hyun had worked hard to achieve his place in the world, leaving behind his small rural hometown for the bustling life in the capital. He had no use for things like memories or past lives. For him, everything was about the future, the next project, the next success, the next step in his climb. But it was this very disregard for the past that would eventually lead him to a confrontation with something far more powerful than he could have imagined. It all began one evening when Ju Hyun returned home late after a long day at work. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the cold air of autumn wrapped itself around the city like a veil. As he unlocked the door to his small apartment, he thought he heard something faint, a distant sound, like a soft sobbing. He paused, listening closely, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. Dismissing it as nothing more than the wind or his tired mind playing tricks, he went about his evening as usual. But that night, the sound returned, and this time, it was unmistakable. It wasn't the wind or an animal, but the unmistakable sound of someone crying. It seemed to echo from somewhere within the apartment, like the sound was coming from the walls themselves, pressing in on him. A deep, mournful cry that pulled at something deep inside him, a feeling of loneliness that lingered long after the sound faded. Ju Hyun froze, a cold chill running through him. He tried to shake it off, but the sound was there again the following night, and the night after that. It became a regular part of his evenings, growing louder, more persistent, as though the very space around him was being filled with grief. He couldn't explain it, and worse still, he couldn't ignore it. As the days passed, the crying sound in Ju Hyun's apartment grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just an unsettling noise anymore. It became a presence, one that clung to him wherever he went. The sound echoed in the quiet moments, in the space between his thoughts until he could no longer escape it. The source of the sound seemed to shift with every passing night, sometimes near the kitchen, other times by the windows, and sometimes it seemed to come from behind the walls, as though someone was trapped, weeping for release. Ju Hyun would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, but the cry would still be there, resonating deep within his chest. It was as if the cry wasn't just a sound, but a memory, one that stirred emotions within him he could not explain. At first, Ju Hyun tried to brush it off. Perhaps it was just the result of living alone in a quiet apartment, or maybe the stress of his job was affecting him more than he realized. But then, something changed. One night, after hours of staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, he heard something that struck him deeper than the sobs ever could. A voice. It was faint at first, barely above a whisper, but there was no mistaking the words. "Why did you leave me?" it asked, the voice filled with a pain that seemed to come from all around him. His body froze as his mind scrambled for an explanation. He tried to reason it away, perhaps a memory from his childhood or a dream creeping into his waking moments. But the voice came again, louder now, more insistent. "Why did you leave me behind, Ju Hyun?" The mention of his name sent a shiver down his spine. He sat up in his bed, heart racing, the weight of the room pressing in on him. The voice was unmistakable, not just a figment of his imagination, but something far more real, something deeply familiar. He couldn't understand it at first, but as the night dragged on, a sinking feeling of dread crept over him. He had heard those words before. He had heard them years ago from someone who was now long gone. Ju Hyun's mind was flooded with memories, all at once, faces, places, moments of his past that he had buried deep within himself. Among them, one stood out. He saw the face of a woman a woman he had left behind, a woman who had been a part of his life before he left his small hometown for the bright lights of the city. Her name was So-yeon. She had been his first love, the kind of love that only exists in youth, the kind that burns bright and fast before it burns out. They had met in high school, two souls connected by a quiet understanding, a shared bond of isolation in the small, tight-knit community they came from. But after graduation, Joo-hyun had moved to Seoul to pursue his career, and So-yeon had stayed behind. He had promised to return, promised to stay in touch. But he hadn't. His life in the city took over, and as time passed, So-yeon's letters became fewer, her messages less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The guilt of how he had left her, a promise broken, a love abandoned, resurfaced now, crashing through him like a tidal wave. The crying, the voice, it all made sense now. So-yeon had never truly let him go, and now her pain, her regret, was calling to him from the darkness. But the question was, why now? Why had her presence returned after all these years? Joo-hyun could no longer ignore the connection between the crying, the voice, and his past with So-yeon. Every night, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if So-yeon's sorrow was echoing from the very walls of his apartment. But what could he do? How could he fix something that was broken so long ago? The memories of their time together came flooding back, memories of warmth and laughter, of promises made beneath the cherry blossoms in their hometown. But it was always overshadowed by the memory of his departure, his abandonment. He had never truly understood the depth of So-yeon's attachment to him, the weight of the love she had given him. He had left without a second thought, driven by ambition, by the promise of success in the city. And now he realized, too late, the cost of his selfishness. As the days wore on, Joo-hyun grew increasingly restless. He stopped sleeping, his eyes bloodshot from the constant wakefulness, and his mind a haze of guilt and regret. The cry became a constant presence, one he couldn't escape, whether he was at work or at home, in the crowded streets of Seoul or alone in his apartment. Even when he tried to drown it out with music, with television, with the noise of everyday life, it was still there, the echo of So-yeon's pain, her sorrow, reverberating through the silence. One evening, after another sleepless night, Joo-hyun found himself standing at the window of his apartment, staring out at the endless sea of lights that stretched across the city. The noise of the city, the hustle and bustle that had once felt like freedom, now felt like a cage. He felt disconnected from it all, from everything, as though the world had moved on without him. And in the distance, through the haze of the night, he thought he saw her. So-yeon. Her face appeared briefly in the reflection of the window, her expression one of sadness and longing before she disappeared into the shadows. This wasn't just a haunting, this was a reckoning. The ghost of So-yeon, the woman he had once promised the world to, was not just calling out for revenge or closure. She was calling for him to confront the truth about his choices, his abandonment, and the way his decisions had shaped the course of both their lives. But what could he say to her? What could he do to undo the years of silence, of hurt that he had left in his wake? The weight of it all crushed him, and yet he couldn't look away. He couldn't escape the voice, the presence, the way she clung to him, as if waiting for him to admit what he had done, to finally take responsibility for the damage he had caused. One night, unable to bear the haunting any longer, Joo-hyun made the decision to return to his hometown, to the small village he had left behind so many years ago. He knew that he couldn't move forward, couldn't find peace, until he faced So-yeon's memory, until he confronted the place where it all began. The trip was long and arduous, the road winding through the hills and forests. But when he finally arrived, everything had changed. The village, once so familiar, was now a shadow of its former self. The homes stood empty, the streets quiet, and the cherry trees that had once bloomed so vibrantly now seemed like lifeless skeletons. Yet, as Joo-hyun stood at the edge of the village, he felt a pull, a presence that called to him. It was as if So-yeon's spirit had never left, as if the very air around him was thick with her memory, her longing. Joo-hyun wandered through the now desolate streets of his old hometown, his steps slow, the weight of his own guilt heavy on his shoulders. The village, once full of life, seemed to have faded into the past, much like his memories of So-yeon. He couldn't help but wonder, had he been the cause of its decline? Had his absence, his abandonment, somehow poisoned everything around him? As he passed the familiar landmarks, the old market square, the small cafe where they used to sit and talk for hours, the memories came flooding back. He remembered the warmth of So-yeon's smile, the quiet moments they shared, and the promises they made. promises he had broken. It felt as though time had stopped in this place, and yet it also felt as though it had moved forward, leaving him behind. The once vibrant village was now a ghost of what it had been, much like the woman who had haunted his every step. His search for answers led him to the small cemetery at the edge of the village, where the graves of the past lay silent beneath the thick cover of overgrown grass. Among them was Soyeon's resting place, a simple stone with her name engraved upon it, surrounded by wildflowers that had long since lost their color. He knelt beside the grave, his heart pounding, his breath shallow. It was here, in this quiet place, that he realized something profound. Soyeon was not just a memory of the past. She was a reflection of his own regrets, a symbol of the life he had turned away from in his pursuit of ambition. The cries, the whispers, the cold presence that had followed him all these years, they were not just manifestations of her spirit, they were the echoes of his own conscience, of his failure to acknowledge the damage he had caused. As Ju Hyun sat there, staring at the grave, he felt a deep sorrow well up inside him. It was not just the sorrow of losing someone he had once loved, but the sorrow of realizing that he had never truly understood her. He had left her behind, and in doing so, he had left behind the part of himself that had been capable of love and empathy. The crying he had heard, the voice that had haunted his nights, it wasn't just Soyeon's spirit calling out for him. It was his own soul crying out for forgiveness, for the chance to heal the wounds he had inflicted. The truth was clearer now than it had ever been. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many miles he put between himself and his past, he would never be free from the guilt of abandoning Soyeon. In that moment, as the wind rustled through the trees and the silence of the village enveloped him, Ju Hyun finally understood the true nature of the haunting. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a supernatural force that had come to claim him. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with the past that he had refused to face. The crying, the whispers, the cold presence, they were all part of the same truth. He had to accept responsibility for his actions, and in accepting that, he would find the peace that had eluded him for so long. With trembling hands, he whispered a quiet apology to Soyeon, the woman he had failed, and to himself, for the man he had become. As the wind died down, and the last rays of the setting sun cast a soft glow over the village, Ju Hyun felt something change. The weight on his chest seemed to lift, as though a burden he had carried for years had finally been released. The crying, the haunting, had stopped, and for the first time in years, Ju Hyun was left with only silence, a silence that strangely felt like the beginning of something new.